Spencer Knight gets pulled for the first time as a member of the Blackhawks, and yet another lopsided loss in the back end of a back-to-back.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one sports podcasting network where we bring you your team every day. I'm Jack Bushman. On today's episode, I'll recap the Blackhawks' 7-3 loss to the Pittsburgh Penguins last night. Then in segment 2, I'll discuss Nick Foligno finally returning to the lineup for the first time in over a month. And then in segment 3, I'll get into the latest updates from the 2026 World Junior Championship. But first, just a real quick reminder to please go and follow Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram if you haven't done so already, as that's the latest account that I'm really trying to boost up here and grow. I share clips of every goal that the Blackhawks score, got some cool graphics that I frequently post, and I also provide updates on every one of the Blackhawks' top prospects in the system. So make sure to go in, show some support, and follow Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram if you haven't done so already. But happy Monday, Blackhawks fans. Hope all of you out there had a wonderful and safe Christmas weekend spent with friends and family. Tough way for the Christmas weekend to end, though, for us Chicago sports fans, as the Bears were unable to score a touchdown before the clock hit triple zeros to pull off yet another comeback victory against the San Francisco 49ers last night. Tyler Bertuzzi did score before the clock hit triple zeros at the United Center, but unfortunately the game was already well in hand at that point as the Blackhawks were defeated 7-3 by the Penguins in the back end of their weekend back-to-back. They were unable to ride the momentum they got from shocking the Dallas Stars on Saturday in their first game back out of the Christmas break to finally put an end to the losing skid and pick up a win for the first time since Connor Bedard got injured back on December 12th. But things got out of hand early and often for the Hawks in their return to the UC, as Pittsburgh scored 4 goals on their first 7 shots of the game in the opening 12 minutes. In the blink of an eye, the Blackhawks were down 4-0 and were never able to recover from that early hole that they dug themselves into. And it was probably the worst game, I think it's safe to say, of Spencer Knight's tenure with the Chicago Blackhawks so far, as he got pulled for the first time since being acquired from the Florida Panthers at last year's trade deadline. And I would say at least 3 of the 4 goals that the Pens got by him in the opening 12 minutes were pretty soft. The Anthony Mantha turnaround shot from the right circle looked like a harmless shot attempt on the net that somehow the puck managed to trickle through Spencer Knight's pads to give the Penguins a 1-0 lead. To be fair, I don't think the Blackhawks' defense on most of these goals was as spick and span as it needed to be. However, considering the level that Spencer Knight has played at all throughout the season, these were saves we expect him to make. Anthony Mantha, a weak wrister, winds up putting the Penguins ahead 1-0. The second goal, Brian Rust, I thought this one was more so a symptom of the Blackhawks getting caught puck watching and having all their eyes on Sidney Crosby in transition. You can go and watch that clip. Wyatt Kaiser, Artem Levshinov, both are watching Crosby intently as he entered the offensive zone. That left Brian Rust all alone down the left flank, and he absolutely rifled a shot over Knight's glove to put the Penguins ahead 2-0. No real gripe about that goal that Knight gave up, as it was a beauty of a shot from Brian Rust. But the third goal that the Pens scored from Justin Brazeau, a little bit of a softie from right out in front. The Hawks defense, again, I don't think did Knight any favors here, as Matt Grzelcyk didn't go and attack the puck carrier. I think it was Mantha behind the net. Just allowed him to kind of maintain possession right behind Spencer Knight and then eventually gets the puck to the center. Brazeau didn't get a ton of good wood on it. And again, it's one that Spencer Knight regularly stops with the way that he's been playing this year, but that one managed to trickle its way through to make it 3-0. And then the one that ended up leading to Spencer Knight getting pulled, Brian Rust with the second of the period, a real soft wrister from out on top of the right dot, a pretty bad angle for that one as well. Another shot that just somehow found its way through. And that led to Spencer Knight hitting the bench as Jeff Blashill elected to put Arvid Soderblom in at that point in time. Knight would go on to return for the start of the third period. Interestingly enough, Blashill said that, he was just trying to provide a spark to his team by putting in the backup goaltender. And once it became pretty clear through 40 minutes that the Blackhawks weren't going to come back, he said he wanted to give Knight some reps coming out of the Christmas break. So strangely elected to put him back into the contest. But yeah, tough game for Spencer Knight. Like I said, probably his worst as a member of the Blackhawks. But hard to get too mad at him for this one, considering it's his first game really like this of the 25-26 season. And again, on a nightly basis, for the most part, has been standing on his head and performed as one of the best goaltenders in the league. Just simply didn't have his best stuff in this one against the Penguins. And not being able to come up with those timely saves, like I said, put the Blackhawks in an early hole that they just were never able to recover from. And it leads to their fourth consecutive lopsided loss in the same number of back end of back-to-backs that they've had so far this season. All four of them have led to blowout losses, 9-3 to the Buffalo Sabres back in November. Then the Hawks also were blown out 7-1 by the Anaheim Ducks earlier this month. There was the 4-0 loss to Patrick Kane, Alex DeBrincat, and the Detroit Red Wings in the first game without Connor Bedard a couple of weekends ago. And then here we get this 7-3 defeat to the Penguins. However, compared to the first three back ends, the first three final games of a back-to-back, it's kind of hard to word that properly. But when playing a second game in as many nights, I did think overall this was the Blackhawks' best performance, which really isn't saying all that much, right? Probably their two worst performances of the season, Buffalo and Anaheim, have come in the back ends of back-to-backs. But Jeff Blashill thought the team played a lot better compared to those two games. And the stats actually do go and back that up. The real difference in this game, Blackhawks fans, was that the Hawks couldn't get a stop from Spencer Knight early on. The Penguins converted on their best scoring chances, while the Blackhawks didn't. They hit the post twice in the opening 20 minutes. They certainly had their chances to get on the board, but the Iron and Artur Shilovs was able to keep them off of the board, and they weren't able to claw their way back from that early deficit. But if you go and look at the stats from this game, the Hawks led 55-33 in shot attempts, 30-17 in scoring chances, and 13-9 in high danger chances at even strength. I know even though they only scored once in the third period, that was probably their best period of the night, but even in the opening 40 minutes, they still had the advantage in most of those statistics. And the way that they were playing, the final score and how much they were down early wasn't really indicative of their performance. I do think while they weren't at their best, especially defensively, and I just kind of outlined some of the breakdowns that allowed the Penguins to go and pot 4 goals in the opening 20 minutes, the Blackhawks weren't at their best, but I also didn't think they deserved to lose by 4 goals in this one. This was just kind of one of those weird hockey games. It was really a wonky one. I mean, there were goals being scored left and right in that second period. Spencer Knight, a rare shaky performance from him. Just a wonky night at the United Center that unfortunately led to a lopsided loss for the Blackhawks. But there are definitely still things that they need to clean up on the defensive side of things, and they need to be shutting teams down defensively more often than not if they want to win games without Bedard and Frankie Nazar being in the lineup. Before I move on to segment 2 here real quick, I do want to briefly give a shout out to Tyler Bertuzzi, because I thought he was a man on a mission last night, and even when things weren't going he and his team's way in the opening 20 minutes, he gave a full effort from start to finish and easily could have had 2, 3, maybe even 4 points in this game. Obviously scored his 19th goal of the season with 0.8 seconds left on the clock. Kind of felt bad for Jack St. Ivany, young defenseman for the Pittsburgh Penguins. A broken stick forced him into making a turnover. Bertuzzi picks up the loose puck and beats Shilovs in the final second, literally, of the game. But Bert easily could have had 2 or 3 assists in this one. I mean, he was hounding the puck down all night long, setting up teammates for primetime scoring chances. I believe it was Arty Levshinov who rifled a shot off the crossbar in the opening 20 minutes, off a feed from Bertuzzi. He also was on a 2-on-1 rush with Landon Slaggert, fed him a perfect pass right in his wheelhouse for a one-timer, but unfortunately Slaggert fanned on the shot. Bertuzzi was just super noticeable all throughout the course of last night's game, and that's how he has to play for the Blackhawks to have any chance whatsoever. I know, obviously, because they couldn't get timely saves in the opening 20 minutes, they didn't have a chance last night, but Bertuzzi needs to get back to being the junkyard dog once again, and I've thought he's done that over these last couple of games. Even going back to the final game before the Christmas break against the Philadelphia Flyers, he was a menace in that game as well and had a lot of great opportunities from right out in front, point blank, in his office, the net front. That was the case, obviously, in Saturday's win against the Dallas Stars, and he was able to snowball that into another great performance last night, albeit in a lopsided loss for the Blackhawks against the Pittsburgh Penguins. The stats on the night when Tyler Bertuzzi was on the ice in all situations, the Blackhawks led 26-8 in shot attempts, 18-1 in scoring chances in all situations when Tyler Bertuzzi was on the ice last night. And the Hawks also had a 7-1 edge in high danger chances. So Tyler Bertuzzi did his thing last night. Unfortunately, only wound up on the stat sheet with a goal in the final second of the game, but that's now his 19th of the year. And I believe he's missed 2 games for the Blackhawks so far this season. He's played in 36 contests, on pace to score 40 goals for the first time as an NHLer. Once Connor Bedard gets back fully healthy, obviously that's going to help Bertuzzi's cause, but he needs to keep playing like this for the Blackhawks to have any chance whatsoever. The first, 4 to 5 games without Connor Bedard, he was far too quiet, and it wasn't surprising as a result. So was the Blackhawks offense. If Tyler Bertuzzi can keep playing like that, the Blackhawks have a little bit of a better chance to pick up some wins until Frankie Nazar and Connor Bedard return. All right, there is my breakdown of the Blackhawks suffering yet another one-sided loss in the back end of a back-to-back. That's now 4 in as many games so far this season. Coming up in just a moment, I'll break down Captain Nick Foligno returning to the lineup for the first time in over a month. But first, I do got to talk to you all about one of today's sponsors here on Locked On Blackhawks, which is Game Time. Hockey season is officially here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. But let's be real. Getting tickets can be a total headache. Between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout, it's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is go and cheer on your team. But that's where Game Time comes in, the app that now gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NHL tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. So go and take the guesswork out of buying NHL tickets now with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and then use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps, and you'll also get $20 off on your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off with your first purchase with Game Time. Real quick, as always, before I get into segment 2, just a quick reminder to please go smash that like button if you're watching here on YouTube today, and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. If you're tuning in through an audio platform, please go and rate and review the show if you like what you're listening to on a regular basis. It's all 100% free, will not cost you anything, and helps me out in a real big way in growing my platform. All right, segment 2 on today's episode. Just a couple of hours before last night's game against the Penguins, the Blackhawks finally got some positive injury news as Captain Nick Foligno was activated off injured reserve and made his return to the lineup, playing for the first time since November 15th, over a month ago, when he suffered a hand injury while blocking a shot against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And while the losses of Connor Bedard and Frankie Nazar obviously have heavily impacted the Blackhawks negatively, more so over these last couple of weeks, I do really believe that losing their captain and chief leader in Nick Foligno, not having him around the team, not having him in the locker room to help kind of, lead the youngsters through some adversity, I really do feel like that played a part and maybe hasn't been talked about enough, and how that impacted the Blackhawks kind of falling apart right around Thanksgiving. Because when Foligno got injured in the middle of November, that's when the Blackhawks were playing their best hockey. At that point in time, they were in the midst of a 5-game point streak. They extended that to 5 in that game against the Maple Leafs, in which Foligno got hurt. But they were also, of course, right there in the Western Conference playoff picture in one of those wild card playoff spots. And we were also, I think one thing that was more so prevalent with the Blackhawks earlier on in the season, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this was happening when Foligno, their chief leader, was healthy. The Blackhawks were showing a lot of resiliency early on in the season, and in games that were close, going into the third period, they found a way to come out with wins in a good amount of those contests. They were finding ways to pick up 2 points in those close contests. And that just hasn't been the case ever since Nick Foligno went down. And I just wonder if the Blackhawks weren't able to, keep that same mentality or have the same confidence that they could pull out those close contested victories once Nick Foligno went down, because in 19 games without him, and again, well, obviously the losses of Connor Bedard on December 12th, Frankie Nazar on December 20th, that has led the Blackhawks record getting even uglier until Foligno returned last night. But still, in general, I definitely think Foligno, the Blackhawks going 5-12-2 in 19 games without Nick Foligno, yes, a couple of those at the end of that stretch were also because the Blackhawks couldn't score enough goals without their top 2 center icemen. But I just keep going back to that game on, I think it was November 20th against the Seattle Kraken, the 3-2 loss when the Blackhawks were ahead 2-0 going into the third period, had a chance to extend their point streak to 7 games. And ever since, allowing 3 unanswered goals in that third period, Connor Bedard doesn't get that penalty call in the final minutes on a breakaway. Things have really spiraled out of control for the Blackhawks. And I just wonder, when they didn't have Foligno during that time period, did that lead to them just not being able to prevent things from spiraling out of control so much? And a couple of times since that third period letdown against the Kraken, we've also seen the Blackhawks go and blow third period leads, or in games where it feels like they would have been able to hang on and come away with 2 points. That just wasn't the case. And I just really feel like Nick Foligno's absence definitely impacted what's transpired with the Blackhawks ever since Thanksgiving. So I know Foligno isn't going to be the solution to the offensive woes that the Blackhawks have had here recently, but I do think it's really key to have him back as their veteran, experienced leader when there's not a ton of it in the locker room for a lot of the young kids. I know the Blackhawks are an older team without Connor Bedard and Frankie Nazar, but I still think the point makes sense there that I'm trying to get across. But it was great to see Nick Foligno get back in the lineup last night. I know he's been itching over these last couple of weeks. Returned to practice, actually, I believe 2 weeks ago from today. And then, of course, traveled with the Blackhawks for their Canadian road trip. Wasn't able to return for any of those 3 games. Wasn't able to return for the Christmas break. Wasn't able to return for the first game out of it, which probably had to be very frustrating for a guy who's watched, the Blackhawks suffer as many losses as they have in the 19 games without Nick Foligno. I'm sure he was dying to get back out there and help out his boys. Was able to return last night. Unfortunately, didn't lead to a different result for the Blackhawks. But I thought Nick Foligno looked pretty sharp in his first game back, and he scored the opening goal of the game for Chicago to get them on the board at the midway point of the second period. Really nifty whack that Foligno had on the rebound. I think he put the puck between his own legs and managed to sneak it by Artur Shilov's. That's actually his first goal of the season, and what a time for it. Sure, that had to feel good for Foligno, who, by the way, I just love, even when things aren't going great for the Blackhawks, obviously, as of late, they were showing Nick Foligno got the start in his first game back in the lineup, and the camera that always pans down to the Blackhawks who are on the ice when Jim Cornelison is always belting the anthem as always. Foligno's like giving the camera a funny look, like just keeping that light spirit. I seriously enjoy so much, even in these troubled times for the Blackhawks. But nice to see him finally pick up his first goal of the season. Also chipped in for 2 hits and just over 13 minutes of ice time. I thought he looked good in his first game back. Didn't seem to have any issues with that wrist in terms of the power on his shot. He actually recorded the Hawks' first shot on goal in the game in the opening minutes, and then obviously had a nifty little finish to pot his first goal of the season. So hopefully Nick Foligno can help kind of pick up the mood in the locker room and be that key leader that the Blackhawks need him to be when they are going through adversity like they're dealing with right now. He's obviously, like I said, not going to be the solution to the offensive problems, but I think it's big to have him back and to keep the mentality straight for the rest of this roster. All right, there are my thoughts on Captain Nick Foligno returning to the team against the Penguins and scoring his first goal of the season. Coming up in just a moment, before I close out today's episode, still got to get into the latest updates from the World Junior Championship. Segment 3, only one of the 3 Blackhawks prospects participating in the 2026 World Juniors was in action on Sunday, and that was Anton Frondell in Sweden taking on Switzerland. And it was a little bit of a scare for the Swedes on Sunday as Switzerland led 2-1 going into the third period, but Frondell helped Sweden rally for 3 unanswered goals to defeat Switzerland 4-2 and moved to 2-0 through 2 games in the tournament. Frondell had the secondary assist on Viggo Bjork's game-tying goal on the power play in the opening minute of the third period. That leveled the score 2-2. Is it Lucas Pettersson? I'm blanking on all the Pettersson names off the top of my head, but Pettersson scored the final 2 goals for Sweden in the third period to come away with that victory. Frondell finishes with 1 point, that secondary assist, and was a +1 in just over 19 minutes of ice time. Wasn't able to tune into this game for Sweden as I was having yet another Christmas celebration yesterday afternoon, and then obviously had to travel to Chicago, get down to the United Center for this Blackhawks game against the Penguins. So wasn't able to tune into very much of this game for Sweden against Switzerland. Didn't really get to see how Frondell was looking, but guessing it probably wasn't as noticeable of a showing as it was in the opening game of the tournament where he scored the first goal of the World Juniors, obviously picked up an assist in that game as well. 2 points in a 3-2 win for Sweden over Slovakia, but still a pretty solid showing for Frondell. Made an impact when his team needed him to the most and now has 3 points, 1 goal, and 2 assists in his first 2 tournament games. And Frondell and Sweden will be back in action here today on Monday, December 29th. They'll be kicking off the busy slate up in Minnesota as they take on Germany at 12 p.m. Central Time. And in fact, all 3 Blackhawks prospects at the World Juniors will be in action here today. Frondell and Sweden kick it off against Germany at noon. Then Václav Nestrasil, who has 4 points, 1 goal, and 3 assists, 2 multi-point efforts in his first 2 games of the tournament. He and Czechia will return to action for a really big tilt today against Finland, one that Czechia probably needs, considering they lost their opening game to Canada, did rebound for a nice 7-2 win over Denmark in their last time out a couple of days ago. But big game at the World Juniors between Czechia and Finland later this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. Central Time. And then that leaves AJ Spelisi and the red, white, and blue. They're taking on Slovakia at 5 p.m. Central Time. All of the United States games in the preliminary rounds are held at 5 p.m. Central Time. Think it only makes sense with the tournament being held on American soil. You want to give as many U.S.-based fans an opportunity as possible to tune into this game. And a quick reminder, if you have NHL Network, which I know not everyone does, I don't as someone who has YouTube TV, but you're able to watch every game from the World Junior Championship on the NHL Network. If you're tuning in, if you're a United States citizen, you'll be able to watch these games on NHL Network. Spelisi and Team USA look to remain undefeated against Slovakia at 5 p.m. Central Time. Spelisi has 2 primary assists in the opening 2 games, did not register a point in the United States' last win a couple of nights ago. Anton Frondell in Sweden, they look to remain undefeated as well when they take on Germany at noon. And then Václav Nestrasil and Czechia have a big game to try to get to 2 wins in 3 games when they take on Finland at 2:30 p.m. CT. All right, that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Make sure that you're subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. And if you haven't done so already, even if you are someone who frequently tunes in on YouTube, make sure to follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast. That way, you don't miss out on any of the latest episodes as soon as they become available, regardless of where you're at. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me on X at Jack Bushman2, but my Strictly Blackhawks account, that's at Talkin' Hockey. Go and give that one a follow as well so you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Mondays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.